In the lands of Snotopia, the sun crept over the trees and shone down on the dauntless walls of Snotantinople. Slowly but surely, the rays of light reached down into the boss-burrow of Snotius, the first of his name, the great snot-boss of all Snotopia. As was his custom, Snotius, upon waking, began to pick his nose. With his morning ritual completed, Snotius emerged to resume his work on expanding Snotantinople. 6 more snotlings had emerged that morning, and Snotius set about putting all the other snots to work. Orcoids of all kinds instinctively followed greenskins that were bigger than themselves. The typical snotling stood at a little less than half a meter. A typical snotling also tended to measure his life in hours. But Snotius was beginning his 4th day of life, and he had survived numerous battles. The puke birds, the river monster, the fierce snapping insects. As a result, he now stood at nearly 2/3 of a meter, and was a good head taller than most of the snotlings in Snotopia. The only snot to come close to Snotius in size was Skullbash, the sullen, lumpy-headed snot who had somehow survived a mighty club to the head by Snotius. He was only an hour or 2 younger than Snotius, and had survived nearly as much carnage. But Snotius was still unquestionably the boss. For now. And what a boss he was! He wore the mighty skull of Office, and hard chitinous armor made from the carapace of the ravenous insects that had assaulted Snotantinople, only to be driven away by the flaming dung which the greenskins had come to call Snotfire. He was armed with a short blade made from the mandibles of the slain insects that had been killed in the great battle the day before. Snotius got to work assigning the different snots to different jobs. The big little greenskin wasn't much of a counter, but he assigned an extra snot to building and to water gathering. Snotius himself decided that he and a group of hand-picked snots would accompany him on his exploration. But where should they explore? And what should they look for? Pegleg, the one-legged craftsman, or craft snot rather, stepped forward.
"We got some more snots now. That means we needs more bug suits for 'em. You should go out and hunt more bugs."
Tree Climber, the nimble, long-limbed snot, spoke next.
"No, we should get better rocks for making tools. I bet I could climb a tree and find the best rock spot ever."
After a pause, Skullbash stepped forward.
"No, I say we kill one of the big river monsters. If you's a proper boss, then you won't have no problem killing the big pointy teeth thing."
Snotius made eye contact with Skullbash and scowled. This was revenge. Skullbash had always suspected that Snotius had tried to get him killed on numerous occasions, which was absolutely true. The smart boss had sent him on missions to die plenty of times. But Snotius was not about to back down.
"Let's go kill the river monster! Tree Climber, you coming?"
Snotius pointed out one of the fresh snots that had sprouted this morning.
"Stinkfeet, you're coming too! And Skullbash, it was your idea. Wouldn't want you to miss out on the big fight, would we?"
The four snots prepared for the big fight. The creature in the river was very large, and capable of snapping up a snotling in one bite. The four snotlings were each armed with a mandible, a short-ranged weapon that was suitable for slicing into enemies. In order to fight the river monster with such weapons, the four snotlings would have to enter the water, where they would be sitting ducks for the beast. But Snortius had an idea. He had been growing wiser and more cunning since he popped out of the ground, and ideas like this were becoming more common. The snot had sticks, and the sticks helped them reach things that were far away. What if they tied the mandibles to the sticks so they could hit the river monster from far away? With Pegleg's help, the work was done quickly, and all of the snots were armed and armored and prepared for the fight ahead. Snortius grabbed one of the meat squigs to use as bait to draw the thing near the surface so they could attack. The four marched off. Skullbash and Snortius eyed each other, trying to figure out the best way and time and opportunity to try to get the other one killed. Eventually, they reached the banks of the river. Snortius gazed into the murky depths and could see nothing. No movement, no sign of fish. So he brought out the meat squig and skewered it on the end of a pointy stick. Snortius quickly stuck it out into the water and waited patiently as the blood from the squig leaked into the water. Surely it would draw out the great beast. After 15 minutes, nothing happened. The other snots began to become bored. Snortius held up a finger, demanding them to wait just a little bit longer. Another 15 minutes passed, and Snortius was worried that he had wasted a perfectly good meat squig, when suddenly an enormous shadow began to rise from the depths. It was the river monster. The creature was about 4 times as long as the snots were tall. Its huge, toothy mouth opened wide and snapped shut around the meat squig. The snots, who had been only half paying attention, leapt into action. They ran to the edge of the river and began swinging their weapons as glaives, chopping at the beast as it snaps at the squig. Snortius and Skullbash sliced into the beast, cutting into its side. The monster began to flail and flop about, lashing its head this way and that. The monster's powerful jaws chomped down on Stinkfeet's chopper on a stick, and with a jerk, Stinkfeet was flung into the water. Tree Climber, Snortius, and Skullbash had to wade out into the water to try to save the other snotling, but the creature was too fast. Its jaws snapped around Stinkfeet. The others could hear snapping bones as the unfortunate snot was gobbled whole. Snortius tried to hit the thing in the eyes. He knew how hard it was to fight blind, so he thought he would try and put the creature at a huge disadvantage. Unfortunately, with the thrashing, hitting the relatively small eyes was hard to do, and so he missed. Tree Climber managed to score a hit on the creature's gills. After wounding such a sensitive area, and having both a small meat squig and another snotling to eat, the river monster was content to leave this battle, and move to dive back under the water. And that would be it. That would be the end of the hunt. There was no way the snots could catch it. It was too fast and too dangerous in the deep water. But just as it moved to dive, a lightning-fast stone whizzed just over the shoulder of Snortius, flying towards the river monster, and it was struck right on the head, dazing the creature just for a moment. Snortius arched an eyebrow and got a look at the stranger who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It was an odd-looking snotling, with a lean and hungry look, covered in leaves, and smeared with mud, and possibly some other things that looked a bit like mud, but were far more pungent.
"Who are you?" "Don't worry about who I am. I am the night. I am the day. Oh, I'm a lot of things. I'm also a bush. Look at me leaves. They're so bushy. Me name's Snotbow. Don't worry about it. Go kill that thing."
Not wanting to lose the opportunity, Snotius rushed forward, wading up to his waist into the water. They needed to keep the monster from getting away.
"Everyone, swing the choppers on a stick. Chop so deep so it can't wriggle away."
Snotius and Skullbash hacked into the monster, but Tree Climber missed his mark. His chopper on a stick was knocked to the side by the flailing fish, and he lost his footing, and only to be pulled out into deeper waters. Enraged, the monster honed in on Tree Climber, but the lucky Snot managed to avoid the gaping jaws, but was still bashed this way and that as the head of the beast lashed around, trying to get a grip on the panicking greenskin. Snotius held out the haft of his chopper on a stick, and Tree Climber managed to grab a hold of it in his panic to get pulled to shore. But Tree Climber had lost his own weapon, which was now floating downstream, somewhere in the center of the river. Upon getting to shore, Tree Climber joined the mysterious camouflage snotling and hurled rocks at the creature, though their efforts failed to secure another good hit. Skullbash got in another good whack on it, causing it to bleed further. The creature was starting to lose quite a bit of blood, and it somewhat sluggishly tried to snap at Snotius. The Snot Boss deflected the bite with his stick of a weapon. Then he and Skullbash raised their weapons high into the air and brought the choppy bits down onto the head of the creature, breaking its skull. Despite a few weak twitches, the enormous monster had been defeated. Snotius cried out in victory. "Wah!" Others joined in as they hauled out their prize. Thick armored scales adorned the river monster. They would make excellent suits of armor. As they began chopping the monster up for parts, Snotius found that the bones of the creature were mostly thin and needly. They weren't as robust as the land animal bones that they had used for tools before. Maybe the thin needly bones would be good for sewing. Snotius decided that thinking was for later. He had important things to do first. Snotius eyed Skullbash, who had been his rival, and he had tried to kill him or get him killed on no less than 3 occasions. But for all that, Skullbash was brave, and was a proper greenskin in the fight with this monster. Snotius gave him the skull of the creature to Skullbash to honor him. When it came time for Pegleg to turn the fish skin into armor, he was able to fashion 2 fine suits from it. Snotius took one for himself, and he pondered who to give the other one to. Skullbash had done his best fighting, but he didn't want to give the shiniest gubbins to his rival. Instead, he gave the other fish scale shirt to Tree Climber. Skullbash scowled from his usual corner of the camp. Snotbow, the mysterious snotling who arrived right in the nick of time, explained himself.
"See, I was spawned in the middle of the woods. There was nothing around but big scary monsters that tried to eat me. So I hid, and I sneaked, and I used me cunning, and I survived and got dead hard.
Snortius made a note of the sneaky snot. He could be useful going forward. For the rest of the snots, it was a night of feasting. Fried river monster for everyone, in the finest squid grease. The name of Snortius was heard echoing from every corner of the camp. Despite his new shiny hat, Skullbash was not content. It is the nature of greenskins to get uppity when they get big enough. And Skullbash was pretty close to Snortius, despite his boss's great victories. And there was the matter of Snortius bashing him in the head and trying to feed him to the river monster and an angry bug. As the party wound down, and the snotlings all began to go to sleep, Skullbash made sure that he was on guard duty for the first shift. It was time for things to change. It was time for his plan to be put into action. No man do they call me. My mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Growing the Tribe. If you like what you heard, please like and comment, as that will help Snortius to crush all usurpers and challengers to the ancient throne of Snotopia. If you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing so you can hear more stories about the political squabbles of Shrieking Gremlins. And if you have no idea what's going on, feel free to click the link to the story playlist, which should be appearing on screen now. And if you would like to support the channel, you can donate via PayPal if you like, or you can also support me on Patreon, where you can see exclusive content if you are a $5 donator. Thank you all very much. No Man out.